In tonight's webinar, we will be diving into the topic of how to land your first UX design job. So there is a lot that goes into this topic. So I've prepared some questions for our panel that cover a range of themes, including the overall field of UX design and the industry, positioning yourself as a UX designer and applying for roles, identifying what type of UX designer you might be, and we'll finish off with just looking at the UX hiring process from a hiring manager's perspective, just to give you some insight on that angle. So we're joined by an excellent panel of Harness Project's mentors and industry leaders. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Alexis Reagan, Head of UX and Design at HSBC. Alexis, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Alexis, and I am currently leading a team I established from the ground out at HSBC Australia. We are made up of a collective of design practitioners with specialization in research, copywriting, and design. And together, we basically solve customer problems and look to improve the overall HSBC banking mobile application, as well as their online banking services as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis. Over to you, Onur. Would you like to introduce yourself? Onur is the CEO of Calctree. Oh, you might be frozen.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yep, that's right. CEO of Calctree. It's coming through. Yeah. So, I've been in the startup game for a while with plenty of experience going from 0 to 1 on a number of different products. So what I mean by that is going from an idea to taking it to market and scaling it. And UX and the design process really runs at the heart of good product development. So it's something I'm passionate about. And also enjoy running some of the programs, the UX fundamentals programs at Harness Projects as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Onur. And finally, Sam from Design Lead at the Helix Collective.
Hey guys, so yep, as Chris mentioned, design capability lead at a venture capitalist startup studio called the Helix Collective. My role in leading the design practice is to really expedite the venture or client by working closely with product management and engineering to ensure that we meet key business leads to get to 0 to 1, like Onur just mentioned. I'm quite new in the role, so only 3 to 4 months now. Previous to that, I was spent 7 years building data-driven enterprise applications with a consultancy called Servian, where I was lucky enough to work with the likes of Macquarie Bank, Westpac, AstraZeneca, and Optus. I've been a mentor at Harness Projects for a couple of years now, most predominantly working across their advanced prototyping courses.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Welcome to everyone. Nice to have you here. For everyone in the audience, this webinar is going to be a Q&A format. So we have some set questions that we're going to go through just to get the ball rolling. But each of you also has a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can submit questions to the panel. We're going to try to get to as many as possible throughout the evening. Obviously, if there are some double ups, we might skip over a few, so don't be offended. If we don't get to your question, we're just going to try and answer all of the topics as best as possible. Okay, so with that said, let's get started into the first topic of the night, which is going to be answering questions on the field of UX design, so we can better understand the roles that are out there to apply for. So I'd just like to ask the panel, and perhaps Alexis, you can kick us off with this one. Do you want to tell us what is UX design and how do UX design roles differ throughout the industry?
So UX design means different things based on the design maturity of the organization. So typically, when we first started at HSBC, design was sort of its infancy stage. So to our stakeholders and leaders, they view UX design pretty much at the end of the design thinking process, where they would have already previously come up with the solution based on whatever the business owner wants to create, and then engage UX design to basically design against their requirements and what the business would like to push into market for our customers. As we as we started to mature in terms of our ways of working with design thinking, we basically incorporated ourselves and helped the business earlier on within the design thinking journey. And what that means is that we help stakeholders starting to identify who the customers are, helping them refine and define their ideas. And in there, we then start actually creating the product itself and then test in terms of usability, product market fit before we release it to our customers. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Alexis. Does anyone want to add to that, Sam or Onur? Any thoughts on that question?
Sure. Happy to jump in. I guess from a kind of UX design perspective across the board, not everything is solely based on a product or a UI or design. I think a lot of times people get a bit kind of mixed up in terms of, okay, we're creating a solution, we're creating a UI, but there's a lot of communication and stakeholder management, like Alexis just mentioned, which goes and predefines a lot of that. So as was mentioned before, it's about how do we take people from a journey to get from 0 to 1, or to get from a facilitation of a certain outcome or process.
Sure. And just on the differences, right? So Alexis, you work at a large corporate. Sam, you're in a fairly unique role, right? At a sort of VC type of organization, and Onur is running a startup. So what are the differences that people can expect if they're out there looking for roles in UX design and considering applying for them? What should they be thinking about if they're applying for a role, say, at HSBC versus Calctree with Onur?
Yeah, I can just start if you like, and Alexis can add to it. I think one of the main differences is probably going to be the amount of, how would you say, like amount of detail and effort that you put into the design process in its entirety. And I think in a lot of ways, when you're in a smaller organization, you're operating in a very lean environment. You're very limited with resources, and speed is everything. So I think often it's much more acceptable to be very scrappy with the design process, and might mean like not necessarily going to as much detail, documenting your findings at each stage of the design process, and you're just working with what you're creating on the run. Whereas in a larger organization, it's important to capture knowledge so that a broader set of stakeholders inside of the organization can follow the journey of this particular project. And so it might have different requirements around that, which Alexis, you can add to, or you can challenge if you like.
I know, 100% spot on. But I would say though, yes, documentation of your design process is really important because we have to take our stakeholders through the journey. But that said, often what we hire for, especially since I'm currently hiring several roles at the moment, we are looking for attitudinal strengths over technical skills. So inherently, if you can document really well, but we don't sense your excitement, or if you're unable to clearly communicate how much you care about the customer, then you wouldn't be exactly very successful in the role. Because as part of being a UX designer within a large organization, clear communication and stakeholder management is extremely important. And that's because in larger organizations, we kind of play the role of a design politician, if some of you have ever heard about that. Quite often you would have very conflicting objectives, key performance indicators, and also opinions as well from very senior stakeholders that goes all the way up to C-suite leaders as well. And it is our role to help them find a solution forward, even though we're not the subject matter experts.
Yeah, totally. It can be quite a negotiation type of role that you sort of need to develop your confidence in. I've found with, particularly for larger organizations. Just going into our next question, which is related to where we ended with this last question. Sam, I'd like to put this to you. How do you gauge design maturity within an organization, and why is that important for someone who's, particularly someone starting out and looking for a role in UX design?
Okay. I'd also maybe like to backtrack onto the last comment as well. So I've spent pretty much all of my career within consultancy. So I think some of the attitudinal strengths that Alexis and Onur have mentioned are very, very, very kind of needed for a consultancy type role, where you need to be able to articulate some of your design decisions and give evidence as to why. But a lot of the time you might be kind of brought in to do a certain job or to do a certain small part of a project. So we would predominantly do kind of maybe 2 to 3 months worth of work, where we're looking at engaging a certain part of the business to be able to extrapolate an idea out to then get and create a business case to move forward. So I guess that kind of focuses a bit more on craft rather than the kind of end-to-end kind of design skills, but being able to use those soft skills are very important. In regards to your kind of previous your question that you just asked, Chris, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of kind of differentiation between or there's a lot of terminology within design. You've got kind of your UX Y / kind of product designer type role, which is essentially an end-to-end role. I would say those are kind of more reserved for your growth organizations, startups, where you would be covering the full end-to-end process. If you're looking more into a kind of enterprise bank, for example, like HSBC, I would assume you would have a set number of different roles where you might be a little bit more siloed into doing, say, user research, and you would have a team building out user research and delivering that off to another part of the design team. So I guess from like my experience from a consultancy perspective, I initially started out at what I would say were maybe a low maturity design maturity. So referencing the Envision Design Maturity Index, Servian would probably have been around a 2 at the time when I started 7 years ago, and that has kind of moved up to maybe a 4, where we now have design right at the center of everything that we do, and talk to design as something where it's not seen as a kind of ugly sister or ugly brother, where you're able to really have and bring that to the table with executives and push through kind of core KPIs and walk through from that perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam, for that background. And we've got a question from the audience that I just want to table. Unless, Onur, did you have any comments on that last question? Or
yeah, sure. Gauging design maturity, I kind of view it almost like what Alexis mentioned around attitudinal strengths, but in this case, the attitudinal strengths of actually the company leadership. And usually for me is, do the leaders of the business have an ability to leave their ego at the door and suspend their judgments and what they believe should be solutions whilst you undertake the design process? Or are they quick to jump to conclusions, quick to want to move to a solution that they think is the right solution based on maybe the initial research you did? If that's happening, they're kind of, warning bells for me versus the prior, which is a maturity of listening. That's very essential when it comes to running a design process, because it's emergent. You're discovering as you go along, and there's going to be more that you discover. But if you put your own view on things too early, well, then you've added a filter that's going to hold you back from discovering the true potential of what you're doing.
And so, Onur, let me ask you just a follow-up question to that. So for someone who hasn't had experience in the design field, they've come out of a course, or they're looking for their first role, what are they looking for in that interview process, that application process, to try and give them some sense of whether this organization has that maturity, right? That can be quite tricky, I think, for those early starters.
It's a great question, Chris. And I think a way I would treat that is, do you, during the interview process, feel heard? So as you're having that, interview should be a two-way discussion. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Are they talking at you, or is it an actual dialogue? And by dialogue, it's where we're reciprocating a level of sharing and listening to one another. And do you sense, a maturity in their listening in that interviewing process? I think it's probably a good, signal as to how they more broadly listen to their customers and the rest of it.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. Makes sense. Okay, I'm going to just jump to an audience question. This is from Anonymous. The question is, what would you say is the biggest barrier when entering into the UX field, specifically when finding work with companies when they're advertising entry-level job that senior-level applicants are also applying to? I get from this question that, there's that sort of question between, how do you sort of measure up against others that might be applying for a role that may be more senior? Who wants to tackle this one?
I can jump in. So I personally did not have a formal education in design. I basically did that all on the side, on top of my uni studies and actual work itself. So my degree is actually in journalism. It has nothing to do with design. But while putting myself through universities, I started putting websites together, built my portfolio up, and then got a job in a digital advertising agency. And after that, I started to then look into to establish my interest in design, because I wanted to know, with all the things that we're putting out there to customers, were they actually something that people wanted? Then I kind of ventured into different roles in terms of conversion rate optimization, product marketing, leading cross-functional teams as a product owner, but always having that UX design lead type of role as well. But it also has to do with the time. Back in the day, UX wasn't a very common term. Your web designers were basically your UX designers. So kind of just wearing many hats at the same time. And I think it's how you pitch yourself in terms of a design practitioner, right? Ultimately, UX design to me is about customer centricity. And if every role that you have been doing to date has been around the customer, you can kind of pivot into that formal UX design role. And having that so-called formal education is just to formalize the terminology that you use. Also using specific design tools to help you articulate how you solve problems for the business.
I'd actually jump on the back of that and say I was actually speaking to someone today who comes from a completely different background and wants to get into design and UX, and they came to me probably very kind of has imposter syndrome to an extent, to say, look, I don't have any experience. Can you please help me? And we ran through some of her previous experience within industry that wasn't necessarily design related, and it turns out that she has all of the soft skills which is required to be a UX designer. She's facilitated workshops that have brought incremental changes to processes. Things like that are very kind of cross transactional from one area to another. So I think even if you may not have that traditional design experience, even if you come from like just a university background, you could have had experience within hospitality and dealing with customers who are not like maybe disgruntled. So you're using your soft skills to be able to communicate your ideas to people. So I think if, as Alexis mentioned, if you can be able to draft and craft your story to really integrate some of that background and your own personal experiences, that's what I as a hiring manager would want to hear, and it all kind of talks to each other.
Yeah, my top tip would be that if you come from a totally different industry, would be to at least have a sense check of aligning your CV to what the job description is asking for. The only reason why I say that is because quite often we have recruiters that are filtering out the applications that are coming through. So we might miss out candidates that have great attitudinal strengths and would be a good fit. But if I don't get your CV, I'm never going to get a chance to see you. So it's very important that, you have the main keywords in terms of what we're looking for in a designer that matches the job description so that you can be shortlisted.
And so I might add to it, and Chris, I'm just kind of jumping ahead to the next question that was there, which is, I think, linked to what Alexis just ended on, which is there a disconnect with the design team and, the hiring team? And like Alexis mentioned, you've just got to think about being the shoes of these different people in this organization. So for the talent acquisition team, they may be dealing with hundreds of applications and they need to get through that as quickly as possible. Like, it's just natural that they need to apply efficiency to the process. So there's going to be a checkbox type process they're going to undertake, right? They're going to be looking for keywords in your CV. They're going to be looking for things like a portfolio. So, you got to understand your different audiences here. So for the hiring, that's your first kind of point that you want to get past. Again, like Alexis said, massaging, basically, talent acquisition people are given a position description that often the hiring manager puts together, and they all, collaborate on it and they refine it further. And then the talent acquisition is going to look at that position description and see if your CV is a bit of a match with that. So you want to try to, again, like Alexis said, use the words that you're starting to see in all of these different job descriptions in your CV. And then the second is a portfolio. I think, it really adds a lot of value for you to try to visually communicate your experience and potentially past projects. And these projects can be hobby projects. That could be something that you volunteered on, throwing anything together visually. It can even just be you dissecting some popular websites and maybe reimagining some of the UX or so forth. These all add a lot of value, and quite quickly, you'll get through that initial checklist with a talent acquisition person. And then when you get to the hiring manager, that goes to the type of stuff Alexis shared before around attitudinal strengths and so forth, because that inherent drive and motivation within you, is a really important force in being a good working team member.
Great, guys. Thanks for Sam here. Do you want to go ahead?
And I guess to touch on portfolio, I guess your portfolio is essentially just a vehicle to get you through the front door to an interview. And you're essentially just asking or answering the question, are you capable of being able to do the day-to-day craft of the role? So again, just to get through to the front door, and then if you can get through that kind of first checklist, you're kind of good to go.
And to give you a tip on that, like with a recent cohort that I mentored in the UX fundamentals program, sharing with them that in the past, with my experience, when my UI wasn't necessarily as good as someone that's an experienced UI designer, I actually pulled my portfolio together and then gave it to a friend of mine who's a UI designer and got them to completely polish it up. And it paid dividends. It only maybe cost me a meal to reward him for his effort. But the amount of times the recruiters complimented my portfolio just because of its visual appeal and simplicity, opened up a lot of doors. So it could seem superficial, but just even visually how you're presenting yourself makes a really big difference in that first impression.
Yeah, the first impression thing's a really big important point. There's so many minor details that can really just put you immediately at the bottom of the list. If it's like grammar, if it's sort of spelling, it's how things are presented. It just needs to be easy, and it needs to make you feel comfortable and at ease with what you're looking at if you're a hiring manager. If it feels jagged and hard to understand and you're trying to work it out, you just move on to the next one. So keep that in mind. You know, spend the extra time to get that material ready before you start submitting. There's a follow-up question here from Elena, who often sees requirements of 4+ years experience in the field for a junior position. Does that make sense at all? And should we apply this? Should we apply if we've only just finished our studies, so to speak?
I'd say 100% apply, because quite often what happens is the talent recruitment team might have just copy and pasted a part of the job description and then left the rest the same, because it's a template of there's a certain format that they have to follow. So for the most recent role that I was advertising, which is a UX researcher role, I specifically wrote in there that I wrote 6 months to 3 years experience. And I also noted that they can be students with any sort of psychology or a basic background in terms of design could apply for. But when I saw the LinkedIn ad out there, it said 3 years. So then I had to write back and go, hey, I noticed that it said 3 years. Can you please fix it? But if I didn't go into LinkedIn and check it, that would have just been the ad that is being advertised.
It's a really good point. And this happens a lot. Pretty much every cohort we have, I get the same question: should I apply for roles if it's got multiple years experience? And we always say, just apply. You know, as Onur said, your presenting your work gets you through those doorways. There's a few, doors to pass. The first is that talent HR part. And so if you apply with a portfolio, that'll get you through that door. And then it's the hiring manager's turn to sort of see what their perception of your portfolio is and your application. So yeah, definitely apply.
And what's the worst that can happen, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you just get a rejection email, or you might not get a response.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So let's move on to the next topic area, because we're just conscious of time. We will come back to some audience questions in a minute. The next segment is really about identifying what your strengths are and the type of UX designer that you are. So the first question I want to ask the panel is, how do you uncover who you are as a designer? What are the personal traits that might impact this decision? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
Happy to. I guess be worth to actually work out what are you passionate about. As we kind of covered earlier on, there's multiple different areas that you can look at focusing on. I know a lot of people come from psychology-based backgrounds, so that usually ties quite closely with UX research and the first kind of stage of the double diamond. Other people are more kind of graphically inclined, so are more passionate about the UI side of things. So being able to tailor your portfolio to what you're passionate about and aiming to go for the types of roles that you're interested in, rather than saying, okay, like, this is the experience I have and this is what I've done. Using things like side projects to help bolster up your portfolio and showcase some of the tools and craft that you may not have had the opportunity to do in your studies or aspects like that is always a good thing to do. I would also say extracurricular type of things as well. So I was speaking to someone on ADP list, June. I think he's on the call today. We were running through his portfolio, and he's just completed a career accelerator, and after running through after running through his portfolio, he had a Medium article link at the bottom of his portfolio, and it's got about 10, 15 Medium articles which talk about design and shows his passion for design. For me, that's so much more valuable than the portfolio pieces and case studies that he has on his website. So making sure that is proliferated into that portfolio and website is, I'd say, 100 times more valuable than what he's currently doing.
And I'd like to also add that if you are already working in a specific specialization of design, that you can still pivot if you want to, and if that's where your passion lies, or if research energizes you. So personally, I started out my career more towards the UI side of things. That is no longer the case. Now I focus more on strategy and research. And that's just doing exactly what Sam has just said, doing more side jobs, take up projects on the side to kind of hone in that scale and grow your portfolio and work your way towards that direction.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Just a few more questions around this topic, particularly for those who are just landing roles in UX. So I'm going to take the next audience question. So let's say you're the only person hired on the team as a UX designer. Any tips on how to do the role and still improve your UX skills? I've only just secured a role yesterday after doing a boot camp.
I can speak to that, as I was a sole designer in the first 2 to 3 years of my career. I think making sure that you utilize your networks is very, very important, especially if you are a lone designer. Aspects such as, or platforms such as ADP lists, where you have access to the world's design leaders, being able to book in like half an hour sessions with design leaders to talk through certain problems or reviews for UX UI pieces is very important. So having that kind of constant connection to community is important. As designers, I think we are very tribal as a group. So I think that's kind of the key kind of takeaway that I feel as once a sole designer was kind of really grasping onto.
A few other things, practical ones. There's a lot of Slack communities. Go and find one, jump in it, jump in the discussions. You'll find your own peers, share each other's work, review each other's work. There's also, I think it's ADP list, right? That's the mentoring site for designers. I think it's branching into more disciplines, but it started in the world of design, and you can pair up, with an experienced designer from a reputable company, if that matters to you, and you can get mentorship and meet with them regularly and get them to review your work and so forth. There's excellent resources out there and networks and peers to support each other.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. This is just a question on education level required. So someone from the audience is asking, do you need a degree or formal education in UX? My background is in digital and design, and I'm currently advising on UX UI for some enterprise products.
I firstly just wanted to say, awesome engagement, everyone, from the audience, just with the questions. We kind of keep up with all the questions that are coming through, which is terrific. You're keen and hungry to just get some straight answers. So yeah, look forward to whipping through as many of these as possible. On your experience, so Alexis mentioned she had never studied in design, nor had I. I learned it myself. Back then, there was still is a well-known design consultancy called IDEO, and they first published human-centered design, and I was self-taught in the rest of it. But everything changes, right? That's 8-10 years ago when it wasn't as kind of formalized, and then you've got companies like harness projects and general assembly, and other companies that have, starting to add more structure in terms of the body of knowledge around UX design. So expectations inevitably will change as like a profession matures more. But I think Alexis and Sam, you probably both have a better read. From my background and experience, I wouldn't judge a person based on whether they've done a qualification or not. If you haven't done it, you have to really prove it by having a very solid portfolio. If your portfolio is not as perhaps strong, or you don't have past experience, then complementing it with a program, I think adds credibility in my eyes. It's just a bit relative, I suppose. So yeah, that's some thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say the education is just the start. Your portfolio and the way that you market and brand yourself is, I'd say, 100 more times important than the experience that you have through study and traditional learning. Which brings us nicely onto harness projects.
Yeah, so I guess without talking too much about our own products, that's not what we're really here for. We have a philosophy that the more we can get our students working on live projects, immersing themselves in the design process, meeting with stakeholders, the more equipped you are to go out there and speak about your design process and instill confidence in hiring managers. And you also obviously have the artifacts of the projects themselves to demonstrate your experience. So that's what we provide, and something that we're really sort of passionate about. Alexis, did you have any thoughts on that question before we move on?
No, I think you've covered it all. I just wanted to add that my background was exactly in digital and design, even though I studied journalism. It just kind of ended up in UX UI because of the portfolio that I was building for myself. So if you're already advising on enterprise products, maybe formalize it and massage it in a way where, you could pitch yourself as a UX designer or a UI designer and go from there.
And just to add on to another question, which was a communication design degree, I accidentally clicked the answer live button before. So just to kind of answer that one quickly. Yeah, I mean, like the communication design degree would probably hold the same underlying design principles to UX design and so forth. And communication design is a very big part of UX design. It's about the experience, right? And what's how do you kind of lead that user through that experience? And communication happens in multiple modes. Like it's not just written, but it's visual communication via the product screens and so forth. So again, a basis of good communication design understanding translates whether it's written or visual.
Awesome, thanks, guys. Just further on, I guess, because we're talking about education and what we present to hiring managers, there's a question asking about just the portfolio itself. Is it preferable to have a link to an online portfolio or attach a PDF portfolio with your resume?
I think it's based on the job application form, right? Like, what do you have to submit? Is it a document that you have to upload and you constrain to that? Well, then yeah, you're probably going to need it in a PDF. Are they allowing you to insert a link? Then you can use a link. I know personally for me, being on the run, one of the best things that often work is a PDF that's on a Google Drive that you just then share the Google Drive link. So I can just open it and it's up in my web browser, and that's quite easy. Can look at that on the mobile phone, on the run, and so forth. Compared to necessarily doing something online, like some website where you're trying to display all of your portfolio, looked at website and building websites suited to your portfolio structure can be finicky, and so something quite reliable often is a PDF coming back to that. So yeah, you can play on the safer side just to make sure there's not issues of like responsiveness of your online site to work on mobile or laptop and so forth. So yeah, I tend to find PDFs to be a pretty reliable format, but some of this could come down to individuals' preferences. Alexis and Sam, not sure. I
second PDFs, but also because if you're applying to places that have very strict cybersecurity rules, sometimes certain websites are automatically blocked, so it means I can't access your portfolio. So the best bet is PDF.
I would kind of go the opposite and say everyone needs an online presence, and as we are kind of going into the digital you're essentially building digital products. So I think it's vital to have a online portfolio. However, having a PDF as some examples of your work is also good as well.
Yeah, put it this way, from my perspective, if it's between a half-done website, because websites can be fickle to really get right, versus a well-designed and controlled PDF, I would err on the side of the PDF rather than something that's not quite, like that isn't quite like beautiful, I suppose, with a website.
That's a great point.
Yeah, for me, unless I am hiring for a UI role, I am more interested in the way you communicate your thinking, your design process versus how beautiful your portfolio is. So hence I go for PDFs. But if it's a UI role, then sure, I might say, do you have a digital version that I could have a look at?
Let's agree to disagree. I think with like templated sites like Squarespace and Webflow, you're able to knock up a website in a day. So to have that online digital presence is pretty easy and simple to do. And again, in order to do the same from a PDF perspective, you can use like templates like Canva and InDesign to do similar with your PDF presence as well.
Yeah. I think the added thing to that for me is like, can you tell like which medium is best at telling your story around your portfolio as coherently as possible? Sometimes you're working with templates and structures that kind of add rigidity and don't necessarily give more of a natural storytelling about that various project that you project that you worked on, and what was the problem of it, how did you go about the design process, what was your research, your findings. They're the kind of things you want to cover in your portfolio, right? It's the story about how you went from the problem to the solution and all the steps that you took in between. And so if you're dealing with some template that's making that quite rigid, then yeah, I think you want to just be able to tell your story coherently. And then I think there was a question on, what should be in a portfolio. Look, just Google search that. There will be so many templates and examples of good UX design portfolios. Start with that.
Yeah.
And I'd also say that from a portfolio view, when you are kind of showcasing a case study, I would err on the side of less is more. Again, the problem that you're trying to solve with your portfolio is to try and get through the front door. So if you can showcase that in maybe one or two kind of screen lengths, and then have a PDF slide deck which you can then present in a case study portfolio review, I think that's probably I'd say is the sweet spot kind of going forward.
So just to summarize, guys, because there's no right or wrong answer with this one, right? PDF, online, you can see here from 3 people who have likely hired UX people, they have different perspectives on this. But the underlying theme is you need something that communicates and presents you in the right way. So it's your design process, your experience. As long as we can see that, that's fine. I do lean towards having a digital presence. If this is a role that you're moving into that UX is about digital, you need to try and demonstrate that you're comfortable in this space. And websites do leave a lot more open for error, as Onur said. So you do need to be very mindful of that. But there are templates out there to try and streamline that as well. So it is a balancing act, and don't go to the PDF because you're being lazy is all I'm saying. Don't go to the PDF because it's easy to put it together and you can just get it out. This is important. Spend the time, get it right. Okay, moving on. Let's just go to some other questions. We'll try and continue on the portfolio theme for now. We're overwhelmed with questions, so bear with us. So one of the questions here is, how do you build a portfolio without having proper industry experience? Also, I'm not sure what the second part of that question is. I think you're asking, is the portfolio necessary when applying? So look, our perspective is yes. We built our whole model on ensuring that students have something that they can show employers that sets them apart from other graduates, right? The closer you can get to real world experience, the better. It's not going to be possible for everyone. Not everyone's going to do our course. Not everyone's going to have previous experience. But what do you guys think on the panel? I'll nominate someone. Alexis.
Sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Just on if you don't have any previous experience, any real world experience, how do you build a portfolio? How do you do you even need to send one if you don't have that?
I'd say if you are a student and have never had any job experience, look at social impact companies or look at volunteering. So one of the early projects that I worked on in my career was I reached out to a dog rehoming shelter, and I said, hey, do you guys need a new website? I'd like to, help you guys with one. And then I just went from there and started building my portfolio up, just doing free jobs for people, really. And that could really help.
Thanks, Alexis. Okay.
Another one is jump on Fiverr or Upwork and, just find a task there that's UX related and just do it, do it for $5, doesn't matter. Just get a real client, work on a real project and turn it over.
Yeah, there's many ways to skin the cat. Next question, just from Amelia. So I'm just going to go down the list. As remote work becomes increasingly common, what's a good way to find connections and opportunities in the absence of networking? It's a really good question.
I actually met someone today who's in a sales role. So obviously, it's different from what's expected of a salesperson to maybe a UX design person. But it was interesting. She said she has never applied for a job. The way she's always gotten her jobs, and she's landed really good jobs, is that she has looked at. She's kind of reached out to the relevant members in that team on LinkedIn and introduced herself that way, and then ended up getting referred into the organization. A lot of organizations have referral incentives. So, a company like Atlassian, I don't know what they pay now, but if someone in the company refers, someone to join the company, it's like, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 that they'll get for it. So there's like really good incentive for that person to refer. So here she is reaching out to people on LinkedIn, building rapport on a relationship, and then, asking, is there a relevant job? And then that person goes, yeah, there is actually one. And there's incentive for them to make that referral because they're going to get maybe a few $1,000s for doing it. And they make that referral and she gets in that way. And that was, I thought that was quite smart.
Yeah. And another one is to obviously be active on LinkedIn and follow the companies that you potentially want to work for. And then within these organizations, there's always a tab that says people. And in there, you can go and locate people within design and try and reach out to them that way as well. I have had one person in the past that worked in my team. She reached out to me on LinkedIn, introduced herself, and showed me that she had great passion and strengths in research. And we ultimately hired her. But I didn't get any referral incentive because it's my team.
Yeah, on the back of that as well, we actually hired someone whilst I was at Servian who slipped through the net. So they applied the traditional way, and we didn't pick them up. TA didn't catch their profile, and just kind of got lost in the sea of applications. And contacted on LinkedIn. Really kind of used I like to call it the Andrew Doherty method. So I don't know if anyone can just pop the YouTube link into a previous session that we had with Harness about a year or so ago. There's a framework that he does, essentially how do you UX your job process. I got UX. So I think that's a very kind of good way to do that, to showcase like your skill sets and be able to communicate your value to people over LinkedIn is very important.
Great, thanks, Sam. Okay, so just back on the portfolio, just a couple of questions that we'll do at once. Besides grammar and spelling mistakes, as previously mentioned, what are the common mistakes you see when reviewing portfolios of potential applicants? And also, what are the most important parts to showcase in your portfolio?
I guess that really depends on the type of role that you're going for, but one area that I look for is particularly within the UI that applicants create. So I see a lot of common mistakes where spacing is maybe a bit off. You have borders which aren't correct. You've got buttons and typography which maybe isn't set within the kind of global design standard. So being able to have a very kind of strong craft and eye across your UI, I feel is very important to go forward.
Sorry, yeah, attention to detail on all of that matters to me. I pick it up instantly. My eyes, I can't help it. I know it's frustrating for designers sometimes when they're working with me, but yeah, that's really, really important. And then also keeping it really simple. Like I've seen lots of portfolios where there's like a load of information and it's all messily organized, and it's just quite overwhelming. And I don't have the time to try to make sense of what you're actually presenting. So it needs to be digestible in an instant. Each slide, bang, I get the key message. Next slide, bang, I get the the key message of it. And you're taking me on that story, on that journey, and your storytelling is really, really simple.
And also I'd say quality over quantity. I have personally, when I'm looking through portfolios, I can't look at more than 2 case studies. So put the best one you have forward as the first 2, and that's what your hiring manager would look at. They probably won't pay attention to the rest. Or maybe just submit 2.
I think there's a stat where I think people spend an average of like 90 seconds reviewing a site, right? And then they've already made their mind up whether they're going to progress forward or not. So yeah, first impression is key.
So at Harness, we do a lot of portfolio reviews at the end of our courses. So students submit these to us and we sort of have a look and give them feedback. And from our experience, obviously spelling and grammar is a big one. I know you mentioned besides that, but the other aspects that we notice quite immediately is, as Onur mentioned, either too much of a neutral commentary around the design process, so really just labels of things. It doesn't tell me anything about your design process. If it's just, this is my UX interview, this is my journey map, this is my recommendation at the end of the project, it's just too dry. It doesn't tell me enough about you, and it won't separate you from the other 50 people that I have to go through, right? So you need to, one of the things that human beings do very well from an engagement point of view is tell stories. They tell, think about any person's story that you've heard of recently, and it captures your attention. The more you can get people engaged in your narrative, talk about the difficulties on the project, talk about the emotional, experiences that you had along with what was happening for your user, something to hook the person to be interested to read what happens at the end of the story, right? We want to go through that journey. That'll get them engaged and understand that you've thought this, that you're thinking about this deeper than just presenting artifacts. So I think that's quite difficult. We find it quite difficult to give that feedback, but that's a lot of the time where we're trying to emphasize, where is the story, the narrative in what you're showing. And yeah, so that equally goes to the point around showcasing the most important parts. All right, moving on. Ruhel asks a question. So I'm a university dropout and don't have any professional experience except for short-term roles, except currently as a freelance graphic designer. Any advice? Since I don't have an actual degree nor formal professional experience, will this hinder my prospects drastically?
I'd say on this, in my team today, we have a mix of first-year students to senior designers. So I'd say formal education and having a degree upfront isn't as important. But that said, it also comes down to the types of organizations you ultimately want to apply to. Because obviously, if you're trying to apply for financial institutions, part of the criteria right away set by talent acquisition is that you must have a bachelor's degree. But as a hiring manager, I actually don't care about such things.
Cool. Yeah, it just comes back to what we're talking about earlier about the various steps of the recruitment process, and you're being screened early on based on talent acquisition people trying to get through several hundred applications as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so this person.
That was a good one. Oh, sorry, I'll just jump. Chris, is that all right?
Yeah, sure, man.
I know there was a good one on in constructing your portfolio. How do you do user research? If it's just for your own projects. We had this through the Harness project. So Harness projects, you work on a real live project and you've got to do user research as well. So how do you recruit the right people? Well, in organizations, how they typically do it is they might give an incentive. It's usually a gift card, right? $100, $50, $200, and you'll buy their time. In your case, you're building your own portfolio. You don't want to necessarily spend that money. One of the simplest things you can do is just grab like one of those bags of like fun-sized treats, like those when you get like the caramello koalas, like the 12 of them in a bag or something like that, and just hit the street with your design and literally pull up someone and say, hey, just would love to test a design for a new product, for a new product that I'm working on. It just will take you 1 minute of feedback and, you'll get a chocolate for it. So that's probably cost you like $3 or $4. Well, with today's inflation, with lettuces, I've heard costing up to $5, $10. I mean, that might be a bit more than that. It might be more than $5, but you get the point. If you've got the hustle in you, you'll always find a way to get, feedback on your stuff, and just quite easily, just go to friends and family. It's going to be, there's no issue with, it's not like you're going to disclose who you did that research with, like to the people interviewing you. It's like, oh, this was my girlfriend or this was my boyfriend who gave this feedback. No, you're just going to say user one said this, and you write up that, what their feedback was. And then the insight I got from that was this, and that's how I applied the change then to the design, etc. So it's easy to just go to friends and family, and if all else fails, hit the streets and just give a treat for some feedback.
Yeah, also LinkedIn communities as well. So if you've got, LinkedIn networks, you can always post something there saying that you're doing this specific project and you want some feedback. People are naturally open to giving feedback and will participate. Also hit up Facebook groups too.
ADP list as well.
There's a very strong hustle theme coming through in what you need to do when you're starting out. And so, there are levels to research. You don't need to be doing, extremely formal UX research with focus groups and all of the different, eye tracking software, all sorts of things. That's later in your career. Just get some feedback, try and pull an insight from it and show that you're using that insight to inform your design. That's enough. And you can do it like the way Onur mentioned. This next question is about someone who's actually just landed their first UX role. So this could be a good perspective for those who are on the journey to that. So this person landed their first UX role a few months ago, but they're not sure if it's the right fit. It's a big company with business in different sectors. I am the only UX designer in my team and have no opportunity to work with other UX people or even do user testing. Would you think it might not be a good place to start my first UX job? And what element do you think is important to make a company, to make sure a company is helpful for people who just got into UX field recently? So this is a little bit similar to what we touched on earlier in the piece, but particularly around, if you find yourself in a role that maybe not the right fit, what advice would you have for this person?
I think this comes back to our earlier discussion on design maturity and what the organization view UX as. So if you are the only designer in the area and your manager doesn't understand UX and it's just briefing you requirements, then I'm sorry, but I would say you're not really doing the role of a user UX role other than the title itself. You're doing more of like a UI role or just creating designs based on what your stakeholders want.
I would also want to maybe dig into why that person may not feel that they're the best fit. Is it just purely from a design maturity perspective? Were they expecting to be doing end-to-end product design and they're just doing pure UI work? I would err on the side of caution and say, like, try and just battle through, work across and try and get the positives of what you're currently working on, and then try and craft a story out of that in the next 3 to 6 months, if you then do decide to move on.
Yeah, it's a great point. If it is your first job, they're likely never going to be perfect. No job really is, or some are, but not all. And you just, you really do need to pull out the positives from that experience. Once you've got your foot in the door, we've heard that term before, it makes a massive difference for the rest of your career. So particularly if this is a large organization, that may open doors. So, but we probably need to know more about your particular situation to be able to answer that properly. Okay, this next question is just about basically the question is, would you advise doing the UX design Google certification course? There are mixed reviews online.
I've spoken to a few people on ADP list who have done the UX course, and it depends on like what you want to get out of it, right? If you really want to kind of run through and build out a series of side projects to tell a certain story, then you're using that as, okay, this is my basis to get there. So if that's what you want to do, then great. With Harness, it's a lot more kind of in depth. You get that kind of mentor-mentee relationship where you meet the team, you meet the stakeholders, and you kind of run through that process each week, and you have that guidance along the way. So I guess it depends how driven you are to want to get a certain outcome. If you're really, really driven, and maybe you can't spare like 3 to 6 months with Harness, then maybe the Coursera Google UX cert is for you.
Yeah, I generally found that it can be a really good way to just dip your toe in the water to see if UX is something that you find interesting, particularly for those of you that are new to this world and trying to work out if it's the right fit for you. We've seen a lot of people who've done that course that then come and do a Harness project. So yeah, it's in the line of courses from, getting that start to something more formal and in depth.
I think it's $150 in total, right? So yeah, if you can drop that and kind of work away at that for a few months, and then decide that you're really passionate about UX design, then yeah, I think this $150 well spent.
Okay. So, this is, I guess, a related question from Isaac. For someone with a web developer background who took the Google UX Design Professional Certificate as well as Udacity UX Nano degree last year, although I'm self-taught, I have worked for more than a year as a product designer for a hub in building an MVP for startups. So, quite a diverse background. What are my chances since I want to apply for remote work positions? Who wants to tackle that question.
So the thing is, I think most organizations now are moving towards a hybrid model. So when you say you want to apply for remote positions, does that mean like you have zero intention of actually visiting the office to work with the team? Because I think part of working in design is that ultimately you still want to establish relationships with your team. And that's not to say that you have to go in all the time. So within my team, I have said that we have a work where you see fit culture. Some of my team members come in only just once a month. But that said, they ensure that they're always, contactable across all communications channel, and we have a very open and understanding relationship. So when you say remote, I guess it's just trying to understand, if you were asked to go in, would you still go in?
Yeah, and I guess just from the breast of your question, Isaac, I think your chances are good to apply for a UX role if you've got a dev background, you've done some UX study. As long as your portfolio is ready to show, then I don't see an issue. You've also worked as a product designer, so yeah, I think you're in a good position.
Yep.
Just quickly, if anyone off the top of their head, I've got one idea, but what's the best website to create a portfolio if you want to use something?
I was literally just answering that one, actually. There's a few. I've just been giving written answers just to, serve you all best by getting back to all your great questions. I was just saying, play with a bunch and select the one that suits you most. I'd say Webflow is by far the most powerful and flexible to use. Great that Sam's not disagreeing on that one. Just joking, Sam, you're more than welcome to. It's good to have a bit of debate in public. And it's a little more complicated in that you have to play around with the CSS and HTML, but they are also excellent skills for you to get exposure to. It just gives you a bit more understanding of how web development happens as well, and which is paramount, because what you're doing with design is that you're coming up with solutions that then need to get implemented, right? So for you to then understand, well, what does that implementation look like, and have empathy for engineers and how they're implementing, and therefore you thinking about how do you maybe simplify your designs to make it more easy to implement and so forth, and thinking all those considerations are super, super valuable. So it's a well worth the investment to pick up using Webflow. So that's me.
Plus the templates are awesome.
Yeah.
Another good one, and really quite simple one, is UX Folio. I've seen quite a few candidates create sites from UX Folio, and that's really quite simple to do, and you can really smash that out quite quick.
Awesome.
Nice. Didn't ever know about that one.
Yeah, that one's cool. It's a lot less technical requirement, so you don't need to know too much about any coding, really. Okay, so moving on. Let's see, probably this next question here. Is it okay to send your redo of their website design to the team that manage the website? Will they not get offended on why I redesigned it and sent it to them? This is back to the hustle theme.
Yeah. It's a good one. There is potential to offend because, a lot of, product people can be proud about the work that they've done. So it's just maybe doing it in context, or at least if, did they ask for your suggestions on their website, or you just kind of proactively doing it? If you're proactively doing it, I would just suggest first asking if they'd like some of your ideas on how, you think that they could improve their site. So at least asking, if they're saying yes to that, then, you're getting that permission to receive that feedback. But just, handing over feedback without that consent, that could possibly go the wrong way. Some quick thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. Reach out to the person managing the website and understand why the website is the way it is today. So I'll give you an example. Like the HSBC website is terrible. We rank last in terms of NPS when it comes to our website. We have a lot of customer complaints about it. But my team actually cannot do anything about it because the entire content management system sits offshore, and we have no ability to change any of the layouts. And we can only make content updates, and content isn't managed by UX design. So if someone were to give us recommendations on how to improve it, would be like, thanks, but we've also tried to do this, but we can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Plus, I guess if you are applying, you might not have that business context or the technical constraints of that particular system or template that they're working with.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that, guys. Moving on. So this is an interesting question. It may be difficult for us to answer this without knowing more details on the situation, but how do you distinguish between imposter syndrome in a first UX job as opposed to an actual bad fit? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess, if I've seen their portfolio and their resume and I've found things in that have impressed me, and maybe, in the interview process, the imposter syndrome is getting to their confidence and they may be showing up as lower confidence than what they would normally be. That's probably how I check for it, and versus, if I think their portfolio and CV isn't that strong and I'm not hearing coherent answers from them as well, then yeah, it's probably not a good fit.
But from the person, like the applicant's perspective, right? Say they get the job and they're in the job, and what if it sounds to me like this person is feeling that they're unsure if they are an imposter and they're not ready for the role, or the actual role is not right. If that makes sense.
I think they need to sit down and have a open conversation with their direct manager to unpack whatever they're feeling, right? Is it because they feel like they're not producing quality work, or is it because they can't keep up, or is it because the manager is prioritizing too many things for this person and this person just don't have the capacity to do it, or it feels like maybe they're failing at everything. So often what I find, it's due to prioritization. And also, if you don't speak up to your manager would never know what's going on to help you address it. They also don't know how long you take to complete tasks, and they might just continue to keep piling on and make you feel like you're not performing.
Plus, they've hired you for a reason, right? So I would kind of err on the side of it may be imposter syndrome, maybe communication from both the manager and yourself. I know a lot of organizations are pretty stretched at the minute, and they're very resource light. So the time may not be, the manager might not be given the good enough amount of time to help you, mentor you and guide you through the early stages of your design career. So I think as Alexis mentioned, having that open conversation and asking for support, I think is very important. And I would say from my experience as well, if people reach out and ask for support, a lot of people are more than likely to kind of go over the hill and try and support you to the hill. And that might just be they've got too much on at the minute and they haven't realized that you need the support there.
So I'm just going to jump to some questions that we have prepared around the actual interview process. We've spoken a lot about sort of peripheral aspects, but once you're in that interview process, you have that opportunity to really show yourself, express yourself. what advice would you have? What are the red flags you look for as hiring managers? What are the traits that you look for in those job interviews?
So I would say from a design interview, you would usually kind of go into a portfolio review session. What I would be looking for within a portfolio review session is how can you articulate those ideas and that particular concept. Most likely, I would be wanting to dig down into some of those personal experiences and what they learned throughout that process, rather than actually learning and re-articulating and regurgitating the traditional double diamond process to say, okay, we did X, we did this, we did this, we did this. And a good resource which I kind of always throw over to my mentees is one from a guy called Mizco. So I don't know whether you know Mizco, who's a very kind of good YouTuber, Sydney based. He's got a YouTube video on how to present a UX case study within a job interview, and he's got a very kind of defined template which he takes you through in the video and talks through kind of key learnings and why you did certain aspects. So I think I'll just post it in the chat now. I think that's a very kind of good way to go. And then I guess after you've had that initial round, you may get asked to do a design challenge. I'm not sure what everyone on the panel's view of design challenges are. Sometimes they're a bit of a polarizing opinion across the design industry. But what I would be looking for within a design challenge is how can someone articulate and tell a story through a small amount of time. So we would usually ask for someone to do a design challenge in 4 hours and see what they can do in those 4 hours. And what I would be looking for is, okay, like from a UI perspective, how do you what does your alignment look like? Is your layout okay? Is your components are your components of a standard which is industry standard? Those type of things, and if you're able to really kind of tell that story and articulate a particular business problem, then you're essentially through the door.
Does anyone else want to add their points around the interview process, Alexis or Onur?
In the interview process, for me, the main things that I look for is workshop facilitation skill. So in terms of my specific design challenge that I put out to our candidates is to prepare a stakeholder interview, and potentially the interviewers would be the stakeholders, and you have to interview us to do a journey map of a specific problem that you need to solve. So things like pretend that we are looking to buy our first home and interview us to unpack our home buying process. And then within that session, whiteboard the journey map for us. And in that session, we're not evaluating how well you're doing that journey map, but more about how you're interviewing us, the types of questions you're asking, and your overall, I guess, passion and communication skills.
Great. Thank you. So this next question just is from the actual chat panel from Varsha. I'm just going to find it again. Here we are. Varsha comes from academia with university teaching and research experience. Would it be a good idea to include this background in the portfolio, as I'm just starting in UX and currently exploring UX research, but also keen on content and UX writing?
100%.
Definitely.
Yeah, with that question, Varsha, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, there's not really a lot of experiences that you'd want to omit, right? You just want to find the link to what you're applying for, and there's natural links in what you've shared there.
There's a good question, if we could jump to that, Chris, on, if you're a new UX designer, how open are the stakeholders in your business to listening to your, the research that you've done, right? So, sorry, I should just read the question. How open are companies to hearing about their customers from someone they know hasn't got a lot of UX experience? I think it's a really good question, and probably maybe a lot of people here would be kind of, confronting, just because you're perhaps earlier in your UX career. And what I would suggest with that is try to be as transparent as possible with the research that you've done. So, for example, you're going into presenting to your stakeholders, you have a set of findings yourself. Don't just present your findings, also present like the source research that you've done. So the raw notes, or maybe, somewhat polished up notes or so forth. Let them see what, and try to document as best as you can. Like, you could document via video interviews with your customers as well. So they might not have the time to watch, to read over the notes, but you could do, a short kind of video with clips of different customer interviews that you've done. And then them watching that is like super, super powerful, because they really feel it. They see their customer, the pain point that they've experienced. They hear the voice of the customer as much as possible. So try to capture your research in a way that makes it as transparent as possible. Then go ahead and present your own findings. And at least that way, they can make a judgment on, did you do a good job in synthesizing the research that you've done? And then they won't question your synthesis if they can look at the source notes and see that it's in line with what you've kind of summarized.
I'm going to jump in there to say that you need to take your stakeholders along the research journey. So talk to them and understand the research objectives. Make sure that there is alignment in terms of what the research goals are. Also, when you create the discussion guide, it'd be good for them to also review the discussion guide and get their approval as well. In that way, when you're actually conducting your research interviews, they know what you're actually asking customers. And at the same time, a lot of testing these days are done remotely. So share the Zoom link with them. They could jump in as an observer and just watch the study if they have time. So ultimately, when you come back to the playback session, there would generally be an alignment, and no one would be questioning if you're in the right position or have the right qualifications to be making these recommendations.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Moving on, Nada asks, so I landed my first UX project, but I had to sign an NDA. What's your opinion on applicants who cannot really talk about the details of the project? What are the key details that can be described in a case study without giving away any specifics?
I've been in that situation where we're working on highly sensitive work, especially working within consultancy. Being able to draw out some of the key themes and actually kind of undocs some of what you're presenting is a good way to do that. Also, kind of if you can, maybe removing all branding and just taking a kind of industry view across what you're presenting can be a good way from presenting a certain piece within a portfolio. But just be wary that if you do have that experience listed on your LinkedIn, and then you go onto a portfolio and it's very industry specific, then that might potentially be an issue. I would say that when presenting something, we could potentially go back to that whole kind of PDF paradigm where you're able to maybe showcase something within an interview, but not have that online is potentially a good way to go, or have password protected on the website. So I know Squarespace, Webflow, and UXfolio has the password protection on there too.
Sam. That's great. So just probably one of the finals, finish up with a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up because we're coming up to the end of the session. We touched a little bit at this one before. Perhaps we can quickly list what are some communities where early stage designers can meet fellow designers, connect with mentors, and just improve their intellect generally in this area. So obviously ADP list was one of the ones mentioned. What other ones do you guys recommend?
Sydney IXDA is a good one. I'll be a bit of a harmless brag and say the Sydney IXDA mentoring podcast. Download it because it's a very good resource. So yeah, there's that. The Enterprise UX meetup is a good one that runs every month, and then is it Sydney Product Design meetup, I think is another good one which runs every month or so. And I think there's a couple of others which are kind of product design / product management engineering ones, which are also kind of really interesting and vital to go to. I think just tracking what's on meetup.com is also vital, especially as everyone's kind of coming back to live and in-person events. I don't think you can beat networking at a live event.
And also use the chat for everyone else if you've got resources or networks you recommend, and just share it in the chat for everyone else to benefit from.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So just to wrap up, everyone, first, I just want to say thank you for the incredible list of questions. I think we got through nearly 40 of them, and yeah, nowhere near the questions that we had pre-prepared because you all just did such a great job with that. So really appreciate your input, and we hope it was helpful and valuable to you. Just so you know, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're actually running another webinar. This is based in the US, in fact. So we're now running our courses in the US as well as Australia. We have mentors from Tesla, Atlassian, and the Home Depot from the US. They'll be on that webinar. And it's around a similar theme of how to pivot into a UX design job. So if you want to get more of this type of content, feel free to check out that webinar. It will be US time zone, which means it'll be around 10 a.m. in Australia. So for those of you who can get away and are keen to just log into that webinar, we'd like to see you there. In other news, I'll also just post in the chat a link if you ever want to book a call with me to discuss your career aspirations in UX design, or even a harness projects course and how that can support you. We're always open to discussing that and trying to give you as much support as possible. So with that said, I want to thank our amazing panel for their input today. Thanks for all your great questions and your insights in the industry. We'll hopefully see you guys soon. Alexis, Sam, and Onur are all going to be mentoring our next career launcher course. So we have 2 places remaining on that course. It's going to kick off on the 27th of June. So if you are interested in being a part of that, just let us know. Thanks, everyone. And we'll send out a recording in the next few days, so stay tuned.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.